Hey there, my awesome listeners. Welcome back to another heart-pounding werewolf shifter romance that's going to make your pulse race and your heart flutter. I'm about to take you on a wild ride through moonlit forests, dangerous pack politics, and a love so fierce it defies every law of nature. Meet Aria Blackwood, a rogue wolf who spent 3 years running from a past that haunts her dreams and a destiny she refuses to accept. Tonight, she's crouched in the shadows of Crescent Ridge territory, her heart hammering against her ribs as enemy wolves circle closer. The scent of pine and danger fills her nostrils, but there's something else, something that makes her wolf sit up and take notice. Something that shouldn't be possible. Because Aria Blackwood swore she'd never step foot in Packlands again. She swore she'd never trust another alpha. And she definitely swore she'd never, ever believe in the mate bond. But what happens when fate intervenes, and the one wolf she's been running from turns out to be the one wolf she can't live without? Chapter 1. The forest floor crunched beneath Aria's boots as she pressed her back against the rough bark of an ancient oak, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid mountain air. 3 years of living as a rogue had honed her senses to razor-sharp precision, but tonight, something felt different.
Wrong.
The Crescent Ridge patrol should have passed by now. She closed her eyes and extended her supernatural hearing, filtering through the symphony of night sounds, owls hooting in the distance, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush, the whisper of wind through pine needles. But underneath it all, she caught what made her blood run cold, the deliberate, coordinated footsteps of wolves in human form, moving with military precision. They weren't just patrolling. They were hunting.
Shit.
Aria's wolf stirred restlessly beneath her skin, begging to be released, to run free and fast through the familiar territory of her childhood. But shifting would only make her easier to track, and she couldn't afford to be caught. Not tonight. Not when she was so close to finding the evidence that would finally clear her name. A branch snapped somewhere to her left. She froze, every muscle coiled tight as a spring. Through the gaps in the trees, she could make out the silhouette of a massive figure moving with the fluid grace that marked him as predator, not prey. Even in human form, she could sense the raw power radiating from him, the alpha energy that made her wolf whimper with a confusing mix of fear and something else. Recognition.
No.
That was impossible. Aria had learned the hard way that alpha wolves were dangerous, manipulative creatures who used their power to control and dominate. She'd sworn off pack life, sworn off alphas, sworn off everything that had once meant home and safety and belonging. She was better off alone. The figure stepped into a patch of moonlight, and Aria's breath caught in her throat. 6 feet 4 inches of pure muscle and masculine perfection, with dark hair that looked like it had been tousled by the wind, and a face that belonged in a magazine rather than stalking through the forest like some kind of supernatural bounty hunter. But it was his eyes that made her heart skip a beat, pale blue, almost silver in the moonlight, and currently scanning the shadows with the focused intensity of a born predator. Lucas Steele, Alpha of the Crescent Ridge Pack. The most powerful wolf in 3 states, and the one man she'd hoped never to see again. Their eyes met across 20 feet of forest floor, and the world tilted sideways. The scent hit her first, pine and leather, and something uniquely, devastatingly male that made her mouth water and her knees weak. Then came the sensation, like lightning striking directly through her chest, sending sparks of electricity racing along every nerve ending. Her wolf went absolutely wild, pacing and whining and throwing herself against the mental barriers Aria had spent years building.
Mate. Mate. Mate.
No, she whispered, the word torn from her lips before she could stop it. Lucas went perfectly still, his nostrils flaring as he caught her scent. Those pale eyes widened fractionally, and she watched understanding dawn across his features like sunrise over the mountains. Impossible, he breathed, his voice a low rumble that vibrated straight through her bones. The mate bond. The one thing she'd been told was nothing but fairy tales and wishful thinking. The supernatural connection that was supposed to bind 2 wolves together for life, creating an unbreakable bond of love and loyalty and perfect understanding. the bond she'd watched destroy her mother from the inside out. "Stay away from me," Aria snarled, stumbling backward and nearly tripping over a fallen log in her haste to put distance between them. But Lucas was already moving, covering the ground between them with inhuman speed. "Wait. I said stay away." She spun and ran, crashing through the underbrush with abandon, branches catching at her clothes and hair. Behind her, she could hear him giving chase, his longer strides eating up the distance despite her head start. Her wolf was going insane, howling and clawing to be released, to stop running from their mate and instead run to him. But Aria knew better. She'd seen what happened to wolves who trusted their so-called fated mates. She'd watched her mother waste away, waiting for a bond that existed only in her own desperate imagination, while her father found comfort in other women's beds. She wouldn't make the same mistake. The forest opened up ahead of her, revealing the steep slope that marked the boundary between packlands and neutral territory. If she could just make it to the ridge line. A massive weight slammed into her from behind, sending both of them tumbling down the rocky slope in a tangle of arms and legs. Aria felt the sharp sting of stones cutting through her clothes, felt the jarring impact as they finally came to rest at the bottom of a small ravine. When the world stopped spinning, she found herself pinned beneath 200 pounds of solid muscle and furious alpha male, Lucas's hands braced on either side of her head and his face inches from hers. "Are you insane?" he growled, his eyes blazing with anger and something that looked disturbingly like concern. "You could have been killed. Better dead than mated to you." She spat back, trying to ignore the way her traitorous body was responding to his proximity. The scent of him was overwhelming this close, making her head spin and her pulse race for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. Something flickered across his expression, hurt, maybe, or disappointment. But it was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "The feeling is mutual, princess," he said coldly, pushing himself up and off her with studied casualness. "Trust me, you're the last wolf I'd choose as a mate." The words hit her like a physical blow, even though they were exactly what she'd expected to hear. What she'd wanted to hear. So why did her chest feel like someone had reached inside and squeezed her heart with a fist? "Good," she managed, scrambling to her feet and brushing dirt and leaves from her clothes. "Then we can both pretend this never happened." Agreed. But he was still staring at her with those pale, intense eyes, like he was trying to memorize her features. "What are you doing on my territory, Aria?" The sound of her name on his lips sent another unwanted shiver down her spine. "That's none of your business. Everything that happens on Crescent Ridge lands is my business. Especially when it involves a rogue wolf with a price on her head." Her blood turned to ice. "What are you talking about?" Lucas's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "You really don't know, do you? The tribunal put out a bounty 3 days ago. Every pack in the Northern Territories is looking for the she-wolf who murdered Alpha Davidson's son." The accusation hit her like a sledgehammer to the chest. "I didn't murder anyone. The evidence says otherwise." He started walking toward her, slow and predatory, like a wolf closing in on wounded prey. "They found your scent all over the crime scene. Your hair clutched in his hand. Your blood on his claws." "I was set up." The words exploded out of her, raw with 3 years of pent-up frustration and fury. "Someone wanted me to look guilty, and they did a damn good job of it. So, convince me." He stopped just beyond arm's reach, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. "Tell me what really happened that night." For just a moment, she wavered. The mate bond was pulling at her, whispering seductive promises about trust and understanding and finally having someone on her side. Someone who would believe her when no one else would. But then she remembered her mother's tear-stained face the night her father left for good. Remembered the way love had turned to obsession to madness, until there was nothing left but a broken shell of a woman who died believing in a bond that had never really existed. "I don't owe you any explanations," she said, wrapping her arms around herself and taking another step backward. "And I don't need your help." "You need someone's help," Lucas said quietly. "Half the packs in North America are hunting you. You can't run forever. Watch me." She turned to go, but his voice stopped her cold. The bounty is for your capture, Aria. Dead or alive. The words hung in the air between them like a death sentence. She didn't turn around, but she could feel his eyes boring into her back, could smell his scent on the wind, still devastatingly appealing despite everything he'd just told her. Then I guess I'd better make sure they don't catch me, she said, proud of how steady her voice sounded despite the terror clawing at her throat. And if they do? This time she did look back, meeting his gaze squarely despite the way her heart was hammering against her ribs. Then I guess you'll finally get what you want. A world without me in it. She ran then, putting every ounce of supernatural speed she possessed into getting away from the devastatingly handsome Alpha who smelled like home and heartbreak in equal measure. Behind her, she heard him curse, low and vicious, but he didn't follow, which was exactly what she wanted. So why did it feel like another piece of her heart was breaking with every step that carried her farther away from him? Chapter 2. 3 miles from the ravine where her world had turned upside down, Aria finally allowed herself to stop running. Her lungs burned with each ragged breath, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the ache in her chest where the mate bond pulled and twisted like a living thing. She pressed her back against a massive pine tree and closed her eyes, trying to block out the memory of Lucas's scent, the way his pale blue eyes had widened with recognition, the devastating certainty in his voice when he'd told her about the bounty. Dead or alive. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. 3 years ago, she thought the worst thing that could happen was being exiled from her birth pack for a crime she didn't commit. Now she knew better. The worst thing was discovering that fate had a twisted sense of humor, pairing her with the one Alpha who'd probably collect that bounty himself if given half a chance. Her wolf whimpered, a sound of pure misery that echoed through her bones. The animal didn't understand politics or betrayal or the very good reasons why trusting Lucas Steele would be the stupidest decision of her life. All her wolf knew was that their mate was back there in that ravine, and every instinct screamed at them to return to him. He doesn't want us, she whispered to the restless creature. He made that perfectly clear. But even as she said it, she couldn't forget the way he'd looked at her in that moment of recognition. Like she was something precious and impossible and absolutely terrifying. Like he wanted to pull her into his arms and never let go. The feeling is mutual, princess. Trust me, you're the last wolf I'd choose as a mate.
No.
She was reading too much into a moment of shock. Lucas Steele was notorious for his ice-cold control and razor-sharp political instincts. If he seemed conflicted about the bond, it was probably because he was already calculating how to use it to his advantage. The soft crack of a branch made her eyes snap open, every muscle tensing for flight or fight. But the figure that stepped out of the shadows wasn't Lucas. It was a woman about her own age, with wild red curls and the kind of curves that made men stop and stare. She moved with the fluid grace of a born predator, but her smile was warm and genuine. "Easy there, sugar," the woman said, holding up her hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm not here to drag you back to big, bad, and brooding." Aria blinked in surprise. "Your pack." She could scent it on the newcomer. The distinctive blend of pine and earth and belonging that marked her as Crescent Ridge. Beta female, actually. Zoe Martinez. The woman extended a hand, seemingly unconcerned by Aria's obvious shock. "And you're the infamous Aria Blackwood. I have to say, you're prettier than your wanted posters." "There are wanted posters?" Aria's voice came out as a croak. "Honey, there are wanted posters, reward flyers, and a very unflattering sketch that makes you look like you eat babies for breakfast." Zoe's grin was decidedly wicked. "Though between you and me, I think whoever drew it was clearly jealous of your cheekbones." Despite everything, Aria felt her lips twitch with the urge to smile. "Your Alpha sent you to bring me in." "Actually, my Alpha is back there having what I can only describe as the supernatural equivalent of a panic attack." Zoe settled herself on a fallen log with casual ease, as if they were old friends meeting for coffee rather than enemies facing off in hostile territory. Poor boy's been pacing around that ravine for the last 10 minutes, muttering things like "impossible" and "not now" and "my personal favorite, this can't be happening." The mate bond gave a particularly vicious twist, and Aria had to bite her lip to keep from gasping at the sudden surge of longing that swept through her. "He'll get over it," she managed. "Will he?" Zoe tilted her head, studying Aria with sharp green eyes. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you both got hit by the supernatural equivalent of a freight train. And frankly, Sugar, you look about as miserable as he does." "The bond doesn't mean anything," Aria said fiercely. "It's just biology. Pheromones and instinct and wishful thinking." "Aha." Zoe's tone was skeptical. "Is that why you're out here in the middle of nowhere, looking like someone just stole your favorite toy? Because the bond doesn't mean anything?" Aria wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly feeling exposed and vulnerable under the other woman's knowing gaze. "You don't understand. Lucas and we have history." "Oh, honey, I know all about your history." Zoe's expression softened with something that looked like sympathy. "I know about the night Marcus Davidson died. I know about the evidence that pointed to you. I know about the trial that sentenced you to exile without ever giving you a chance to defend yourself." The words hit Aria like physical blows. "Then you know why I can't go back. Why I can't trust any of them." "I know what the official reports say," Zoe agreed. "But I also know my Alpha. And Lucas Steele doesn't strike me as the kind of man who'd let an innocent woman take the fall for someone else's crime." "He was there that night," Aria said quietly, the memory still raw after 3 years. "At the tribunal. He sat in that chair and listened to them list all the evidence against me, and he didn't say a single word in my defense." Zoe was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. "You know, there's something you might not know about that night." "What?" "Lucas wasn't supposed to be there. He was scheduled to be in Portland, meeting with the Western Pac Alliance about territory disputes. But at the last minute, he changed his plans. Drove 6 hours through a blizzard to get to that courthouse." Aria's breath caught. "That doesn't mean anything, doesn't it?" Zoe stood up, brushing dirt from her jeans. "A man doesn't drive through a blizzard for someone he doesn't care about, Sugar. And he sure as hell doesn't spend the next 3 years turning down every alliance marriage proposal that crosses his desk because he's not ready to settle down." The words sent a flutter of something that might have been hope through Aria's chest, but she crushed it ruthlessly. "You're lying." "Am I?" Zoe's smile was gentle but knowing. "Ask him yourself. I guarantee he'll be along any minute now. That mate bond isn't going to let him stay away for long." As if summoned by her words, the scent of pine and leather and devastating mail hit Aria's senses like a wave. Her wolf immediately perked up, tail wagging with pathetic eagerness despite her human half's protests. Lucas emerged from the tree line like something out of a fantasy novel, all broad shoulders and predatory grace, his pale eyes glowing slightly in the darkness. But it was the expression on his face that made Aria's knees weak. Gone was the cold, controlled alpha from the ravine. This man looked raw, desperate, like he was hanging on to his composure by a thread. "I was wondering when you'd show up," Zoe said cheerfully. "I was just telling Aria here about your romantic history. Or lack thereof." "Zoe." Lucas's voice was a warning growl.
"What?"
"It's not like it's a secret. Half the pack thinks you're gay, and the other half thinks you're holding out for your mysterious dream woman." She winked at Aria. "Turns out they were both wrong. That's enough." The command cracked through the air with alpha authority, making both women's wolves instinctively want to submit. But Zoe just grinned, apparently immune to her alpha's intimidation tactics. "I'll leave you two to work this out," she said, already backing toward the tree line. "But just so we're clear, Sugar, if you decide to stick around, you're welcome in my pack. We could use someone who's not afraid to stand up to tall, dark, and growly here." And then she was gone, leaving Aria alone with the man who smelled like home and felt like destiny and scared her more than any bounty hunter ever could. "She's right, you know," Lucas said quietly, his eyes never leaving Aria's face. "About the alliance marriages. About Portland. I don't want to hear this." "You drove through a blizzard to watch them exile me?" "I drove through a blizzard to try to stop them from exiling you." The words came out raw, like they'd been torn from somewhere deep inside him. "But I was too late. By the time I got there, the decision had already been made." Aria stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. "You're lying." "I've never lied to you, Aria. Not once." He took a step closer, and she caught another intoxicating whiff of a scent. "The evidence against you was overwhelming. Your scent, your hair, your blood, it all pointed to you as the killer. But something about it felt wrong." "What do you mean, wrong?" "Too convenient. Too neat. Like someone wanted to make sure you took the fall." His jaw clenched with barely controlled fury. "I've spent the last 3 years investigating Marcus Davidson's real killer." The words hit her like lightning, sending shockwaves through her entire body. "What?" "I know you didn't kill him, Aria. I've known it from the beginning. But knowing and proving are two different things." He ran a hand through his dark hair, the gesture so achingly familiar it made her chest tight. "I'm close to finding the truth. Closer than I've ever been. But I need your help." "My help?" "You were there that night. You saw something, heard something that the real killer doesn't want you to remember. That's why the bounty went out. Someone's getting nervous." Aria's mind reeled, trying to process what he was telling her. For 3 years, she believed that everyone thought she was a murderer. That Lucas had sat by and watched her get railroaded because it was politically convenient. But if what he was saying was true, "Why should I believe you?" she whispered. "Because," he said, closing the distance between them until she could feel the heat radiating from his skin, "I'm your mate. And despite what you think about the bond, despite your very reasonable fears about alphas and trust and all the ways this could go wrong, I would die before I let anyone hurt you." The sincerity in his voice, the raw emotion in his pale blue eyes, nearly undid her. Every instinct she possessed screamed at her to believe him, to throw herself into his arms and let him handle everything. But she'd learned the hard way that instincts could lie. "I need time," she said, proud of how steady her voice sounded. "To think. To figure out what I want to do." Pain flashed across his features, but he nodded. "How much time?" "I don't know. The bounty hunters won't wait, Aria. Every day you're out here alone is another day someone could find you.
Kill you."
His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Come back to the pack house. Let me protect you while we figure this out." The offer was tempting. So tempting it made her chest ache with longing. But accepting his protection would mean accepting everything that came with it. The bond, the expectations, the inevitable heartbreak when he realized she wasn't worth the trouble. "I can take care of myself," she said. "Against 1 or 2 bounty hunters, maybe. But there's an army of them out there, and they're closing in." His voice dropped to a rough whisper. "Please, Aria. Don't make me watch you die, because you're too stubborn to accept help." The plea in his voice nearly broke her resolve. But before she could answer, the sharp crack of a rifle echoed through the forest, followed by the distinctive whistle of a tranquilizer dart flying past her ear. "Get down," Lucas roared, tackling her to the ground just as another dart embedded itself in the tree where her head had been seconds before. The forest erupted into chaos as dark figures emerged from the underbrush, armed with military-grade weapons and moving with the coordinated precision of professional hunters. Aria counted at least 6 of them, all human from the scent, all focused on her with single-minded determination. "Bounty hunters," she gasped, struggling to get her feet under her. "Not just any bounty hunters." Lucas's eyes blazed with fury as he shifted partially, his fingernails extending into claws and his canines dropping into fangs. "Military contractors. Someone paid a lot of money to make sure you don't make it out of these woods alive." Chapter 3. The first bounty hunter came at them from the left, moving with the efficient grace of someone who'd done this 100 times before. He was built like a linebacker, all muscle and menace, with the kind of cold eyes that said he enjoyed his work a little too much. Aria barely had time to register the threat before Lucas was moving, flowing from human to something in between with terrifying speed. His partially shifted form was a thing of nightmares, 7 feet of pure predator with glowing eyes and claws that could rend steel. He hit the bounty hunter with enough force to send the man flying backward into a tree with a sickening crack. But there were 5 more closing in, and Lucas couldn't be everywhere at once. "Aria, shift," he snarled, ducking under a tranquilizer dart and lunging for the throat of another hunter.
Now.
She wanted to. God, how she wanted to. Her wolf was clawing at her mental barriers, desperate to be released, to fight beside their mate. But 3 years of hiding had taught her caution, and shifting would leave her vulnerable in those crucial seconds between forms. Instead, she rolled behind a fallen log just as automatic gunfire erupted around them, the rapid-fire pops of military-grade weapons mixing with Lucas's inhuman roars of rage. Bark exploded above her head as bullets chewed through the wood, and she pressed herself flat against the forest floor. "There," one of the hunters shouted. "The female's behind the log." Heavy footsteps thundered in her direction, and Aria knew she was out of time. She gathered her legs under her and prepared to run, but a massive hand grabbed her ankle, yanking her backward with bruising force. "Got her." The hunter who'd caught her was grinning like he'd just won the lottery, his grip like a vice around her leg. $50,000 of prime shifter. His words cut off in a gurgle as Lucas appeared behind him, moving faster than human eyes could follow. The Alpha's claws opened the man's throat in one clean swipe, and he dropped like a stone, his blood spattering across the forest floor. "Don't touch her," Lucas growled, his voice barely human anymore. The mate bond flared to life between them, hot and fierce and possessive, and Aria felt an answering surge of primitive satisfaction at seeing him defend her. But the moment of connection cost them. While Lucas was focused on the dead hunter, another one flanked them, raising a modified crossbow that fired not tranquilizer darts, but actual bolts tipped with silver. Aria saw it happening as if in slow motion, the hunter's finger tightening on the trigger, the bolt flying straight at Lucas's back, her mate completely unaware of the threat bearing down on him. Her wolf exploded outward without conscious thought. The shift hit her like lightning, bones elongating and reshaping, muscles expanding, senses sharpening to supernatural clarity. In less than 3 seconds, Aria Blackwood the woman was gone, replaced by a sleek black wolf with amber eyes and a mouthful of razor-sharp teeth. She hit the crossbow hunter at full speed, her 120 pounds of lupin fury bowling him over before he could fire. They went down in a tangle of snarling wolf and screaming human, her teeth finding the soft flesh of his throat with predatory precision. Behind her, she heard Lucas make a sound that was half growl, half moan, the mate bond singing with approval at seeing his female in her true form. But there was no time to appreciate the moment. More hunters were closing in, and one of them was carrying something that made her wolf whimper with instinctive fear. A net, silver-threaded and electrified, designed specifically to incapacitate supernatural creatures. "Lucas," she tried to shout, but it came out as a warning bark. He spun just in time to see the net flying toward them, his pale eyes widening with alarm. But instead of dodging away, he threw himself forward, wrapping his arms around Aria's lupin form and twisting so that his body took the brunt of the net's impact. The silver burned through his shirt instantly, the metal threads searing into his skin with the distinctive hiss of supernatural flesh meeting its natural weakness. Lucas screamed, a sound of pure agony that seemed to echo through Aria's bones, but he didn't let go. White-hot fury exploded through her veins. Seeing her mate in pain triggered something primal and savage in her wolf, something that had been sleeping for 3 years, but now woke with devastating force. The net was still sparking with electricity, but she barely felt it as she shifted back to human form and began clawing at the silver threads with her bare hands. "Get off him," she snarled, her fingers burning as they made contact with the metal. "Get off." "Aria, don't," Lucas gasped, but she was already pulling the net away, ignoring the way the silver left angry red welts across her palms. The remaining hunters were closing in for the kill, their weapons raised and ready. But as Aria knelt beside her injured mate, something shifted in the air around them. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in as many seconds, and the scent of ozone filled the forest like the moment before a lightning strike. Lucas's eyes began to glow, not with the pale blue of his human form but with silver fire that seemed to burn from within. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority, the kind of alpha command that could bring entire packs to their knees. "Leave. Now." The words hit the bounty hunters like a physical force, sending them staggering backward. But these were professionals, trained to resist supernatural influence, and they recovered quickly. "Nice party trick," the lead hunter sneered, raising his rifle. "But we've got contracts to fulfill." That's when the howling started. It began as a single voice in the distance, then was joined by another and another, until the entire forest rang with the sound of wolves answering their alpha's call. The bounty hunters looked around nervously as the howls grew closer, seeming to come from every direction at once. "Boss," one of them said, his voice tight with fear. "Maybe we should." "Hold your positions," the leader snapped. "It's just intimidation tactics." But Aria could smell them now. Dozens of wolves moving through the forest with lethal purpose, drawn by the scent of their alpha's blood and the unmistakable call for aid. The Crescent Ridge pack was coming, and they were out for blood. The first wolf to break through the tree line was Zoe, her red fur gleaming in the moonlight as she launched herself at the nearest hunter. She was followed by what looked like half the pack, all of them in full wolf form, all of them absolutely furious at finding their alpha wounded and under attack. The bounty hunters didn't stand a chance. In less than 5 minutes, it was over. 4 of the hunters were dead, torn apart by the pack's righteous fury. The remaining 2 had been taken alive, though from the looks of them, they probably wished they hadn't been. Zoe had shifted back to human form and was directing the cleanup with military efficiency, her naked body covered in blood that wasn't her own. "Get those bodies buried deep," she ordered, seemingly unconscious of her nudity. "And find out who hired them. I want names, addresses, and bank account numbers." But Aria barely heard her. All of her attention was focused on Lucas, who was still lying on the forest floor with silver burns covering half his torso. The wounds were healing, but slowly, silver poisoning made it hard for supernatural creatures to regenerate. "You idiot," she whispered, tears streaming down her face as she carefully examined his injuries. "Why did you do that?" "The net was meant for me." "Because," he said, his voice rough with pain, "you're my mate, and I protect what's mine." The possessive declaration should have made her angry. Should have triggered all her carefully constructed defenses against dominant alpha males who thought they owned whatever they wanted. Instead, it sent a shiver of pure longing through her entire body. "I'm not yours," she said, but the words lacked conviction. "Aren't you?" He reached up with one burned hand and cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing away her tears. "Tell me you didn't feel it when I was hurt. Tell me the bond didn't sing when you shifted to protect me. Tell me you don't want to take me back to the pack house and lick every one of these wounds until they heal." She wanted to deny it, wanted to cling to her independence and her very reasonable fears about trusting an alpha with her heart. But the mate bond was pulsing between them like a living thing, and she could feel his pain as if it were her own, could feel his fierce protectiveness and desperate need wrapped around her like a warm blanket. "This doesn't change anything," she said weakly. "Doesn't it?" His smile was soft and knowing and absolutely devastating. "You shifted for me, Aria.
You fought beside me.
You pulled silver off my skin with your bare hands. Because you were hurt. Because I'm your mate." He struggled to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at his burns. "And whether you want to admit it or not, that means something to both of us." Zoe appeared beside them, now thankfully clothed in jeans and a t-shirt that one of the pack members must have brought her. "We need to get him back to the pack house," she said, her expression serious. "These burns need proper medical attention." "I'm fine," Lucas protested, but his voice was strained with pain. "You're an idiot," Zoe shot back. "And if you die of silver poisoning because you're too stubborn to accept help, I'm going to resurrect you just so I can kill you myself." Aria found herself smiling despite everything. "I like her." "Everyone likes Zoe," Lucas said. "It's deeply annoying." "I'm also standing right here," Zoe pointed out. "Now stop flirting, and let's get moving." Those hunters had backup communications, which means more will be coming. The word sent ice through Aria's veins. "More hunters?" "Honey, you've got a $50,000 bounty on your head. That's serious money in the supernatural hunting community." Zoe's expression was grim. "Whoever wants you dead isn't going to stop after one failed attempt." Aria looked around at the carnage surrounding them. The blood, the bodies, the pack members still standing guard with their hackles raised. This was what her life had become. Violence and death and constant running, with everyone she cared about caught in the crossfire. "I should go," she said quietly, "before more people get hurt."
No.
Lucas's voice cracked with alpha authority, making her wolf sit up and take notice. "You're not running anymore, Aria. We're going to find whoever's behind this, and we're going to end it. Together." The word hung in the air between them, heavy with promise and possibility and all the things she'd convinced herself she didn't want. But as she looked at her wounded mate, surrounded by his loyal pack members who'd risked their lives to save them both, Aria felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years.
Hope.
"Together," she repeated softly, testing the word on her tongue. Lucas's smile was bright enough to light up the entire forest. Together. But even as Zoe helped them both to their feet and the pack began the journey back to Crescent Ridge territory, Aria couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Something was out there in the darkness, something that wanted her dead badly enough to hire military contractors to make it happen. And until they found out what, or who was hunting her, nobody she cared about would be safe. The mate bond pulsed between her and Lucas like a heartbeat, strong and steady and absolutely terrifying in its intensity. 3 years of running had taught her that safety was an illusion and trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop running and start fighting back. The question was, would her heart survive the battle that was coming? Chapter 4. The Crescent Ridge pack house rose from the forest like something out of a fairy tale, all soaring timber and gleaming glass, designed to blend seamlessly with the towering pines that surrounded it. Aria had heard stories about Lucas's home, but seeing it in person took her breath away. This wasn't just a house. It was a fortress, a sanctuary, a place where a pack could gather and feel truly safe. Too bad, she'd never felt less safe in her life. "It's beautiful," she murmured as the pack convoy pulled up the circular drive, their headlights casting dancing shadows across the massive front porch. "Lucas designed it himself," Zoe said from the driver's seat, shooting a fond glance at the Alpha, who was slumped in the passenger seat, his face gray with pain and exhaustion. "Took him 3 years to get it exactly right. He's ridiculously perfectionist about everything." "I can't hear you," Lucas mumbled, not opening his eyes. "Good. Maybe it'll motivate you to stay conscious long enough to get inside." Zoe parked and was out of the SUV in seconds, moving around to help Lucas while barking orders at the pack members in the other vehicles. "Tommy, get Doc Martinez on the phone. Tell him we need silver burn treatment. Stat. Sarah, I want a perimeter established and patrols doubled. Nobody gets within 5 miles of this place without us knowing about it." Aria climbed out of the back seat, her entire body aching from the adrenaline crash that had hit her during the drive. The forest around them was alive with the sounds of wolves settling into defensive positions, but all she could focus on was Lucas struggling to his feet, his jaw clenched against the pain radiating from his silver burns. Without thinking, she moved to his other side, sliding her arm around his waist to help support his weight. The moment their bodies made contact, the mate bond flared to life, sending waves of heat and electricity racing along her nerve endings. Lucas sucked in a sharp breath, his pale eyes snapping to hers. "Aria." "Don't," she said quietly. "Don't tell me you don't need help. Don't tell me you're fine. And definitely don't tell me this doesn't mean anything." Something shifted in his expression, some of the rigid control he wore like armor cracking just enough to let her glimpse the man underneath. "It means everything," he said, so softly only she could hear. The admission sent her heart into overdrive, but before she could respond, Zoe was ushering them both toward the front door with the efficiency of someone who dealt with wounded alphas before. "Save the romantic declarations for after we get the silver out of your system," she ordered, producing a key card from her pocket and waving it over an electronic lock. "I swear, alphas are worse than toddlers when it comes to admitting they're hurt." The interior of the pack house was even more impressive than the exterior, all warm wood and natural stone, with soaring ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered breathtaking views of the surrounding forest. But it was the scent that hit Aria the hardest. Dozens of wolves, all living together in harmony, their combined scents creating a tapestry of belonging that made her chest tight with longing. This was what a real pack smelled like. What home was supposed to feel like. Medical suites this way, Zoe said, leading them down a hallway lined with family photographs and pack memorabilia. Doc should be here in 10 minutes. I don't need a doctor, Lucas protested, though he was leaning heavily on Aria's smaller frame. What you need is a muzzle, Zoe shot back. But since we're fresh out, medical attention will have to do. The medical suite turned out to be a fully equipped trauma center that would have been impressive in a human hospital, let alone a private residence. Aria helped Lucas settle onto one of the examination tables, trying not to wince at the pain sound he made when the movement pulled at his burns. Let me see, she said, reaching for the tattered remains of his shirt. Aria. Let me see, Lucas. The command in her voice surprised them both, but he didn't resist as she carefully peeled away the burned fabric to reveal the extent of his injuries. The silver had left angry red welts across his chest and shoulders, some of them still weeping clear fluid despite his accelerated healing. But it was the pattern that made her blood run cold. The burns formed perfect rectangles, exactly the size and shape of the net's grid. Someone had designed that weapon specifically to cause maximum damage to supernatural creatures. Bastards, she whispered, her fingertips hovering just above the worst of the burns. Even without touching him, she could feel the heat radiating from his skin, could smell the acrid scent of silver poisoning in his blood. I've had worse, Lucas said, but his voice was strained. When I was 22, a group of hunters cornered me during a full moon run. They had silver bullets. He gestured to a pair of old scars on his left shoulder. Those took 3 months to heal properly. Aria stared at the scars, her heart clenching at the thought of him lying alone and in pain, fighting for his life, while she was, what? Living her comfortable pack princess life, blissfully unaware that the man fate had chosen for her was bleeding out in some anonymous hospital. The mate bond gave a particularly vicious twist, flooding her system with his residual pain, and something else, a bone-deep exhaustion that spoke of years spent fighting battles he couldn't win, carrying burdens he couldn't share. You don't have to do this alone anymore, she said before she could stop herself. Lucas went very still, his pale eyes searching her face. What are you saying? I'm saying. She took a shaky breath, feeling like she was standing on the edge of a cliff. I'm saying maybe Zoe was right. Maybe it's time to stop running. The hope that flared in his eyes was so bright it nearly blinded her. But before he could respond, the door burst open and a man who looked like Lucas's older brother strode in, carrying a medical bag and wearing an expression of barely controlled fury. What the hell happened? Dr. Lucas Steele demanded, his gaze immediately zeroing in on his Alpha's injuries. Zoe said silver burns, but these look like a net, Lucas confirmed. Military grade, designed specifically for supernatural takedown. Jesus Christ. Marcus was already pulling supplies from his bag, his movements quick and efficient. This is going to hurt like hell. The silver's bonded with your skin at the molecular level. I can handle it. Famous last words. Marcus glanced at Aria, his expression curious, but not unwelcoming. You must be the infamous Aria Blackwood. I'm Marcus, Lucas's older brother, and the pack's head medic. Doctor, she corrected automatically, then flushed when he grinned. Just Marcus. And you're right to correct me. I didn't spend 8 years in medical school to be called Mr. He began laying out instruments with practiced ease. Now, I need to warn you, this is going to get ugly. Silver extraction isn't pretty under the best circumstances. I'm staying, Aria said firmly when Lucas opened his mouth to protest. Aria. I'm staying, Lucas. We're in this together, remember? Marcus looked between them with interest, clearly picking up on the undercurrents of tension and emotion swirling around the room. Mates, he said, not a question but a statement of fact. It's complicated, Lucas muttered. It always is. Marcus began pulling on surgical gloves. Aria, if you're staying, I could use an extra pair of hands. You squeamish around blood. Not particularly. Good. because there's going to be a lot of it. For the next hour, Aria found herself playing surgical assistant as Marcus painstakingly removed every trace of silver from Lucas's wounds. The process was brutal. Each extraction sent shockwaves of pain through the mate bond that left her gasping and nauseous, but she gritted her teeth and held steady. By the time it was over, Lucas was unconscious from the pain, and she was covered in his blood, but the silver was gone, and his supernatural healing was already beginning to knit the worst of the damage back together. "He'll be fine," Marcus assured her as he cleaned up the last of the surgical instruments. "Give him 12 hours and those burns will be nothing but bad memories." "Thank you," Aria said, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. The events of the last few hours were catching up with her, leaving her feeling wrung out and emotionally raw. "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when we figure out who tried to kill you both." Marcus's expression was grim as he packed up his medical bag. "Those hunters weren't random bounty seekers, Aria. Someone with serious resources and connections sent them after you." The reminder sent ice through her veins. "Any ideas who?" "That's a conversation for tomorrow, when Lucas is awake and thinking clearly." Marcus headed for the door, then paused. "There's a guest room upstairs. Third door on the right." Zoe left some clean clothes on the bed. "I should probably stay close to him tonight," Marcus interrupted gently. "The mate bond will help him heal faster, and frankly, after what you both went through, neither of you should be alone." Heat flooded her cheeks, but she nodded. The idea of leaving Lucas's side, even to sleep in a room down the hall, felt wrong on a fundamental level that had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with the supernatural connection humming between them. Marcus left her alone with her unconscious mate, the medical suite suddenly feeling both intimate and overwhelming. Lucas looked younger in sleep. Some of the hard lines of command smoothed away, his dark hair falling across his forehead in a way that made her fingers itch to brush it back. Unable to resist the impulse, she reached out and gently smoothed the errant strands away from his face. His skin was warm beneath her fingertips, no longer burning with silver poison, and she felt some of the tension she'd been carrying finally begin to ease. He was going to be okay. They were both going to be okay. For tonight, at least. Chapter 5. Aria woke to the sensation of being watched, her supernatural senses pulling her from sleep with the gentle insistence of morning sunlight. For a moment, she was disoriented. The bed was too soft, the room too quiet, the scent too unfamiliar. Then the events of the previous night came flooding back, and she realized she wasn't in her own bed at all. She was curled up in an overstuffed armchair beside Lucas's bed in the medical suite, a blanket someone had draped over her during the night, keeping her warm. And Lucas was awake, propped up against his pillows, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "How long have you been staring at me?" she asked, her voice rough with sleep. "Not long." His smile was soft, intimate, the kind of expression she'd never seen on his face before. "You talk in your sleep." Heat flooded her cheeks. "I do not." "You do. You were having a nightmare about silver nets and bounty hunters, but then you started mumbling something about coffee and pancakes." His grin turned wicked. "Very cute. Shut up." But she was fighting a smile of her own as she stretched the kinks out of her neck. "How are you feeling?" "Better. Much better." He sat up carefully, testing the range of motion in his shoulders. The silver burns were already fading to thin pink lines, his supernatural healing working overtime. Marcus was right. Having you close helped. The mate bond pulsed between them, warm and steady and impossibly strong. Aria could feel his emotions like they were her own, relief, gratitude, and underneath it all, a deep well of affection that made her chest tight. "Lucas." "I know," he said quietly. "I know this is complicated for you. I know you have every reason not to trust me, not to trust this." He gestured to the space between them, where the bond shimmered like heat waves. "But I need you to know that I meant what I said last night. About protecting you. About finding whoever's behind this." "And then what?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, raw with 3 years of hurt and uncertainty. "What happens when we find the real killer and clear my name? Do I go back to being a rogue?" Do we pretend this never happened? Lucas went very still, his pale eyes searching her face. Is that what you want? I don't know what I want. The admission felt like stepping off a cliff. I've spent so long running, so long convinced that I was better off alone, that I don't know how to want anything else. Then let me want it for both of us, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Let me want a future where you're safe and happy and home. Let me want lazy Sunday mornings and packed barbecues and the chance to wake up next to you for the rest of my life. The words hit her like a physical blow, beautiful and terrifying in their intensity. Part of her wanted to run, to put as much distance as possible between herself and the devastating possibility he was offering. But a larger part, the part that had been aching and empty for 3 long years, wanted to throw herself into his arms and never let go. Before she could decide which impulse to follow, a sharp knock on the door interrupted them. Zoe poked her head in, her expression serious despite the cheerful good morning she offered. Sorry to interrupt, but we've got a problem, she said. A big one. Lucas immediately shifted into alpha mode, all traces of softness disappearing behind a mask of cold efficiency. What kind of problem? The kind that involves Councilman Davidson and a pack of very angry wolves camped out at our front gate. Zoe's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Apparently, word got out that you're harboring a fugitive. Aria's blood turned to ice. Councilman Davidson, Marcus Davidson's father, the man who'd been calling for her head since the night his son died. If he was here, it meant the situation had just gone from complicated to catastrophic. How many wolves? Lucas was already swinging his legs out of bed, moving with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent a lifetime dealing with political crises. 12, plus Davidson himself. They're demanding we turn Aria over for immediate transport to the tribunal. Zoe's expression darkened. I told them they could kiss my ass, but I figured you might want to handle the diplomacy personally. Damn right I do. Lucas was pulling on a fresh shirt, his movements sharp and controlled. Get everyone armed and ready, but keep them out of sight. I don't want this turning into a bloodbath unless absolutely necessary. Already done. Zoe's grin was feral. Tommy's got sharpshooters positioned in the trees, and Sarah's got a squad flanking their position. One word from you, and Davidson's little army becomes wolf food. No, Aria said, the word torn from her lips before she could think. Don't start a war over me. I'll go with them. Both Lucas and Zoe turned to stare at her like she'd lost her mind. Like hell you will, Lucas snarled, the alpha command in his voice making her wolf whimper with the urge to submit. You're not leaving this pack house, Aria. Not now, not ever. You can't protect me forever, Lucas. Davidson has the law on his side. Fuck the law. The vulgarity was so unexpected, so unlike the controlled alpha she thought she knew, that it stopped her cold. And fuck Davidson. I'm not handing you over to a corrupt system that railroaded you 3 years ago. Then what do you suggest? Because hiding here isn't a long-term solution. I suggest we give them the real killer. Lucas's smile was cold enough to freeze hell. Marcus found something last night while we were dealing with your medical situation. Something that changes everything. Hope and terror warred in her chest. What kind of something? The kind that proves you've been set up from the beginning. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through what looked like official documents. Tell me, Aria, what do you remember about the night Marcus Davidson died? The question hit her like a sledgehammer, dragging up memories she'd spent 3 years trying to forget. I was at the Moonlight Grill, celebrating my birthday with some friends. Marcus was there too, drunk and trying to pick a fight with anyone who'd listen. What happened next? He cornered me in the parking lot when I was leaving. Started ranting about how rogues like me didn't belong in civilized pack society, how someone needed to teach me my place. The memory made her stomach turn. He grabbed me, tried to force himself on me. I fought back. And then I ran. I shifted and ran as fast as I could, straight home to my apartment. She looked up at him, confusion and old pain warring in her chest. But the next morning, the pack enforcers were at my door, saying they'd found Marcus dead and my scent all over the crime scene. Lucas nodded grimly. What you didn't know was that Marcus didn't die in that parking lot. He died 6 hours later, in his father's study, with a silver knife between his ribs. Aria stared at him, her world tilting sideways. What? The timeline never made sense, Lucas continued, his voice clinical and cold. You left the bar at 11:30. Marcus's body was discovered at 6 a.m. The coroner estimated time of death between 4 and 5 in the morning. But the evidence, my hair, my blood, was planted at the scene by someone who had access to both you and Marcus between the time you left the bar and the time his body was discovered. Lucas's eyes blazed with fury. Someone who knew exactly how to frame you for a crime you didn't commit. The implications hit her like a freight train. You're saying someone collected my hair and blood from the parking lot fight, then used it to frame me for his murder? That's exactly what I'm saying. And I know who did it. Before he could elaborate, the sound of raised voices from outside made them all freeze. Through the medical suite's window, Aria could see a group of wolves in human form standing at the pack house's front gate, their posture aggressive and confrontational. At their head stood Councilman Davidson himself, a silver-haired man with cold eyes and the kind of political smile that never reached his face. Even from a distance, she could feel the malevolent energy radiating from him, the barely contained fury of a man who'd spent 3 years demanding justice for his son's death. Steele. Davidson's voice carried easily across the courtyard, amplified by supernatural lung capacity. I know she's in there. Send out the murderess, or we'll come in and get her ourselves. Lucas moved to the window, his presence alone enough to make several of Davidson's wolves take an involuntary step backward. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. You're trespassing on Crescent Ridge territory, Davidson. Leave now, or face the consequences. I have a warrant from the Supernatural Tribunal, Davidson shot back, waving an official-looking document. That gives me the right to retrieve fugitives from pack justice, even from your precious territory. Your warrant isn't worth the paper it's printed on. Lucas's smile was sharp enough to cut. Not when it's based on fabricated evidence and perjured testimony. Something flickered across Davidson's face. Surprise, maybe, or fear. But it was gone so quickly Aria might have imagined it. You're harboring a known killer, Steele. That makes you complicit in her crimes. The only crime here is the one you committed 3 years ago when you murdered your own son and framed an innocent woman for it. The accusation hung in the air like a thunderclap, so shocking and unexpected that even Davidson's wolves looked stunned. But the councilman himself went perfectly still, his political mask slipping just enough to reveal the cold calculation underneath. That's a very serious accusation, he said quietly. I hope you have proof to back it up. Lucas held up his phone, the screen clearly visible even from a distance. Bank records showing payments to a private military contractor. DNA evidence that proves the hair and blood found at the crime scene were planted there hours after Marcus's death. And security footage from your estate showing you disposing of the real murder weapon. Aria felt the blood drain from her face. Security footage? Your father kept cameras everywhere, Lucas said, not taking his eyes off Davidson. Including his study, where he murdered his own son in a fit of rage when Marcus threatened to expose his embezzlement scheme. The pieces were falling into place now, creating a picture so horrifying and twisted that Aria could barely process it. He killed Marcus to keep him quiet, then framed me to cover it up. And when you disappeared instead of staying to face trial, he spent 3 years building a case against you, using his political connections to put a bounty on your head. Lucas's voice was deadly calm, all to protect himself from a murder charge. Davidson's facade finally cracked completely, revealing the snarling predator beneath. You can't prove any of that. Actually, I can. Marcus Steele appeared beside his brother, holding a tablet loaded with what looked like official documents. Forensic analysis of the crime scene, financial records, witness statements, everything you need to put Davidson away for life. Plus a full confession from the military contractor he hired to plant the evidence, Zoe added cheerfully, appearing on Lucas's other side with her own tablet. Amazing what people will tell you when they're facing federal conspiracy charges. Davidson's wolves were backing away now, clearly realizing they'd been used as pawns in a much larger game. But Davidson himself stood his ground, his eyes blazing with the desperate fury of a cornered animal. "You think this changes anything?" he snarled. "You think clearing her name will give you your happily ever after? She's still a rogue, Steele. Still damaged goods. Still not worthy of an alpha like you." The mate bond flared with Lucas's rage, so hot and fierce it nearly drove Aria to her knees. But when he spoke, his voice was perfectly controlled. "You're right about one thing, Davidson. This doesn't change everything." His smile was cold as winter. "It changes everything. Because now, instead of being a wanted fugitive, Aria Blackwood is a victim of your crimes. And as the alpha who's going to be claiming her as my mate, I'm well within my rights to demand blood justice." The words hit Aria like lightning, sending shockwaves through her entire system. Claiming her as his mate? In front of witnesses? That wasn't just a declaration, it was a supernatural contract, binding and unbreakable once accepted. "Lucas," she whispered, but he was already moving, flowing down the stairs and out the front door with lethal grace. By the time she and the others caught up, he was standing face to face with Davidson, separated by nothing but 20 feet of packed territory and 3 years of bitter hatred. "Choose," Lucas said simply. "Surrender yourself for trial, or face me in combat for the right to take my mate." Davidson's laugh was ugly and harsh. "You'd risk everything for a piece of rogue trash?" The insult sent white-hot fury blazing through Aria's veins, but before she could react, Lucas had moved. One moment, he was standing perfectly still. The next, Davidson was on the ground with Lucas's hand around his throat. "Call her trash again," Lucas whispered, his voice barely human. "I dare you." Davidson's wolves started forward, but Zoe's people were already there, forming a protective circle around their alpha. The tension in the air was so thick it was almost suffocating, violence hanging over them like a storm about to break. And in the middle of it all, Aria stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs as she realized that everything, her freedom, her future, her chance at happiness, came down to this moment. "I surrender," Davidson gasped, his face turning purple from Lucas's grip. "I surrender to pack justice." Lucas held him for another long moment, then released him with obvious reluctance. Smart choice. But even as Davidson's wolves took him into custody and the immediate threat passed, Aria couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Because clearing her name was only the beginning. The real challenge would be figuring out if she was brave enough to claim the future Lucas was offering her. Chapter 6. The silence that followed Davidson's surrender was deafening. Aria stood frozen on the pack house steps, her heart hammering against her ribs as the full weight of Lucas's public declaration sank in. Around them, wolves from both packs watched with barely concealed fascination, their supernatural senses no doubt picking up every nuance of the mate bond crackling between her and the alpha who'd just claimed her as his own. Claimed her. In front of witnesses. In the most binding way possible under supernatural law. "You can't just," she started, her voice cracking with emotion. "I can and I did." Lucas turned to face her, his pale eyes blazing with determination and something that looked dangerously close to possession. "The claiming is official, Aria. You're under my protection now." "I didn't agree to that." "You didn't have to." His smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "Davidson threatened my mate. That gave me the right to invoke blood justice, which includes the right of claiming." The casual way he said, "my mate," sent shivers down her spine. Part terror, part arousal, all confusion. This is insane. This is pack law. Marcus stepped forward, his expression sympathetic but firm. Lucas invoked an ancient right, one that supersedes modern tribunal authority. By supernatural law, you're now considered a claimed mate under Crescent Ridge protection. And what if I reject the claim? The words tasted bitter on her tongue, but she had to ask. The silence that followed was so complete she could hear the wind rustling through the pine trees. Every wolf present, friend and foe alike, went perfectly still, their eyes wide with shock at the question. Finally, Lucas spoke, his voice carefully neutral. Then you reject it. And you're free to go wherever you want, whenever you want. No one will stop you. But his scent told a different story. Beneath the controlled alpha exterior, she could smell his pain, sharp and bitter as winter wind. The mate bond twisted in her chest, responding to his distress with an answering ache that made her eyes water. But, he continued quietly, the protection ends the moment you walk away. And there are others out there who hired those military contractors, Aria. Davidson was just the beginning. The reminder sent ice through her veins. Others? Someone paid for those hunters. Someone with enough resources to fund a military-grade operation and enough connections to put a $50,000 bounty on your head. Zoe stepped closer, her expression grim. Davidson's confession cleared you of murder, but it also revealed that you're still a target.
Why?
The question exploded out of her, raw with 3 years of frustration. If I didn't kill Marcus, if I'm not a threat to anyone, why won't they just leave me alone? Because, Lucas said, his voice deadly quiet, you witnessed something the night Marcus died. Something someone desperately wants to keep secret. Aria stared at him, her mind racing. I told you what happened. Marcus cornered me, tried to assault me. I fought back and ran. That's all. That's all you remember, Marcus corrected gently. But trauma can cause memory suppression, especially in supernatural creatures. It's possible there's something else, something you saw or heard that night, that could expose whoever's really behind this. The possibility sent panic clawing up her throat. I don't remember anything else. Then we'll help you remember, Lucas said firmly. Together. As mates. There it was again, that word that sent her wolf into raptures and her human half into full retreat. She looked around at the assembled wolves, all of them watching her with expressions ranging from sympathy to curiosity to barely concealed hostility from Davidson's remaining supporters. This was her moment of choice. Accept Lucas's claim and everything that came with it. Protection, belonging, and a mate bond that would tie her to him for life. Or reject it and go back to running, alone and hunted, with no guarantee she'd survive whatever was coming next. The smart choice was obvious. Lucas was offering her everything she'd secretly dreamed of: safety, acceptance, love. But accepting meant admitting that she needed him, that she couldn't handle this alone. It meant trusting an alpha with her heart, her future, her very life. It meant risking everything her mother had lost. I need time, she said finally, hating how small her voice sounded. To think, to process all this. Disappointment flashed across Lucas's features, but he nodded. How much time? I don't know. Aria. I don't know. The words came out sharper than she'd intended, laced with the frustration and fear she'd been holding back. This morning, I was a wanted fugitive. Now I'm cleared of murder charges and you've claimed me as your mate in front of half the supernatural community. Forgive me if I need more than 5 minutes to wrap my head around it. Lucas stepped closer, his scent wrapping around her like a physical caress. You're scared. Of course I'm scared. She gestured wildly at the crowd of wolves still watching their every move. You just upended my entire life. I saved your life, he corrected, his voice gentle but implacable. And I'll keep saving it, for as long as you'll let me. The sincerity in his eyes nearly broke her resolve. But before she could respond, Zoe cleared her throat diplomatically. Maybe this conversation should continue somewhere more private, she suggested, shooting meaningful looks at the pack members who were still lingering, clearly hoping for more drama. Good idea. Lucas turned to address the crowd, his alpha authority making everyone straighten instinctively. Show's over, people. Back to your duties. And someone contact the tribunal. I want Davidson transported to their holding facility within the hour. The crowd began to disperse with obvious reluctance, but Aria barely noticed. All her attention was focused on Lucas, on the way he moved with such casual confidence, such absolute certainty that everything would work out exactly as he wanted. It was terrifying and attractive in equal measure. Come on, he said, holding out his hand to her. Let's talk. She stared at his outstretched palm for a long moment, knowing that taking it would be another step toward accepting everything he was offering. But she also knew that running away, again, wouldn't solve anything. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. The moment their skin made contact, the mate bond flared to life between them, sending waves of heat and electricity racing up her arm. Lucas's fingers tightened around hers, and she saw his pupils dilate with the same overwhelming sensation. "Christ," he breathed, his voice rough. "Every time you touch me, it's like lightning." "I know," she whispered, because denying it would be pointless. They could both feel it, the supernatural connection that bound them together, growing stronger with every moment they spent in each other's presence. He led her back into the pack house, through the familiar hallways that already felt more like home than anywhere she'd been in 3 years. But instead of returning to the medical suite, he guided her up a grand staircase to the second floor, stopping in front of a set of double doors at the end of the hall. "My room," he said, seeming suddenly uncertain. "I thought we could talk privately." Aria's pulse spiked at the implication. His bedroom. The Alpha's private sanctuary, where no other wolf would dare interrupt them. Where they would be completely, utterly alone. "Lucas." "Just to talk," he said quickly, apparently reading her expression. "I swear on my pack's honor, Aria. Nothing you don't want." The promise should have reassured her. Instead, it made her acutely aware of exactly what she did want, and how dangerous those wants were to her carefully constructed emotional walls. "Okay," she said, proud of how steady her voice sounded. "Let's talk." Chapter 7. Lucas's bedroom was nothing like what Aria had expected. Instead of the dark, masculine space she'd imagined, it was filled with warm light and comfortable furniture, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the forest beyond. Books lined one wall, and she could smell the faint traces of lavender and cedar that spoke of careful attention to creating a peaceful sanctuary. It was beautiful. It was welcoming. It was absolutely terrifying in its domesticity. "Surprised?" Lucas asked, apparently noticing her reaction. "I expected something more alpha-ish," she admitted, running her fingers along the spine of what looked like a first edition of Wuthering Heights. "You mean cold and intimidating and designed to show off my status?" His smile was rueful. "I get enough of that in the pack meeting rooms. Up here, I just wanted a place that felt like home." Home. The word hit her harder than it should have, carrying with it all the longing she'd been suppressing for 3 years. This room felt like home, warm and safe and filled with the scent of the man who was apparently destined to be her mate. "Tell me about your parents," he said suddenly, settling into one of the armchairs positioned near the windows. The request caught her off guard. "My parents." "You flinch every time I mention the mate bond. Every time I talk about claiming or mating or anything that resembles a permanent relationship." His pale eyes were gentle but relentless. That kind of fear doesn't develop in a vacuum. Aria wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly feeling exposed. "It's not fear." "Then what is it?" "Pragmatism," she said, trying to inject some steel into her voice. "Self-preservation. Common sense." "Bullshit." The word was said without heat, but it still made her flinch. "Talk to me, Aria. Help me understand why the idea of being my mate terrifies you so much." For a long moment, she considered deflecting, changing the subject, finding some way to avoid the conversation that had been 3 years in the making. But the mate bond was pulling at her, whispering seductive promises about trust and understanding and finally having someone who would listen without judgment. "My mother believed in the mate bond," she said finally, sinking into the chair across from him. "She was absolutely convinced that my father was her destined mate, that their connection was something sacred and unbreakable." And was it? For her, maybe. For him. Aria shook her head, the old pain still sharp after all these years. He was Pack Alpha, powerful and charismatic, and used to getting whatever he wanted, including other women's beds. Lucas's expression darkened. He cheated on her. Constantly. Flagrantly. In ways that made sure everyone in the pack knew exactly what he was doing. The memories were like acid in her throat. But my mother kept making excuses for him. Kept believing that the bond would eventually make him faithful, Make him love her the way she loved him. What happened to her? She wasted away. The words came out flat, emotionless, because it was the only way she could say them. Spent years waiting for a man who would never choose her over his own desires. She died believing in a bond that existed only in her own desperate imagination. The silence that followed was heavy with understanding and something that felt dangerously like compassion. When Lucas finally spoke, his voice was careful and gentle. "I'm not your father, Aria. I know that." The response was automatic, but even as she said it, she wondered if it was true. "But you're still an alpha, still used to getting what you want when you want it. What happens when you decide you want someone else? That's not how the mate bond works. Isn't it?" She leaned forward, 3 years of suppressed pain and fury finally finding voice. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks exactly like what happened to my parents. Powerful alpha meets suitable female, claims her as his mate. Everyone celebrates the happy couple, right up until he gets bored and starts looking for more interesting options." Lucas was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. Then, to her complete shock, he started laughing. "Are you seriously comparing yourself to suitable female?" he asked, his eyes bright with mirth. "Aria, you're a rogue wolf with a price on your head who spent the last 3 years evading every bounty hunter in North America. You've got more spirit and fire in your little finger than most wolves have in their entire bodies. Trust me when I say suitable is the last word anyone would use to describe you." Despite herself, she felt her lips twitch with the urge to smile. "Gee, thanks. You're welcome." He leaned back in his chair, studying her with those pale, intense eyes. "Now, let me tell you something about the real mate bond. Not the fairy tale version your mother believed in, but the actual supernatural connection that exists between true mates." "Lucas." "It's not one-sided," he continued, ignoring her interruption. "It can't be. The bond only forms when both souls recognize each other, when both wolves accept the connection on a level deeper than conscious thought. What your mother felt for your father wasn't the mate bond, Aria. It was obsession." The words hit her like a physical blow. "You don't know that. I do know that, because I know what the real bond feels like." He stood up, moving to the window and staring out at the darkening forest. "I've felt it every day for the last 3 years, pulling at me, driving me half crazy with the need to find you and bring you home." Her breath caught. 3 years. Since the night you were exiled. I watched you walk away from that courthouse, and every instinct I possess screamed at me to follow you, to protect you, to claim you. He turned to face her, his expression raw with barely controlled emotion. "Do you have any idea what it's been like, knowing my mate was out there somewhere, alone and hunted, while I was stuck here playing politics?" The pain in his voice made her chest tight. "You could have come after me. And done what? Dragged you back to face a corrupt tribunal? Put you in more danger?" He ran a hand through his dark hair, the gesture achingly familiar. "I made a choice, Aria. I chose to stay and fight for you from the inside, to find the evidence that would clear your name and bring you home safely. That's why you've been investigating Marcus's murder. That's why I've done everything I've done for the last 3 years. Every political alliance, every favor called in, every resource spent, it was all for you." The admission hung between them like a bridge she wasn't sure she was brave enough to cross. Part of her wanted to believe him, wanted to trust in the supernatural connection that had been pulling at her since the moment they'd locked eyes in the forest. But the other part, the part that had watched her mother slowly destroy herself over a man who would never love her back, whispered warnings about the dangers of trusting her heart to an alpha. "I need you to understand something," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not rejecting the bond because I don't feel it. I'm rejecting it because I feel it too much." Lucas went very still. "What do you mean?" "I mean it scares the hell out of me how much I want this. Want you." The confession felt like stepping off a cliff, but she forced herself to continue. "Every instinct I have tells me to trust you, to let you take care of everything, to believe that this time will be different. But those same instincts are what destroyed my mother. So, what do you want me to do?" His voice was carefully controlled, but she could smell his frustration, his desperate need to fix whatever was broken between them. "How do I prove to you that this is real?" Before she could answer, a howl echoed through the night, long and mournful and filled with such anguish that it raised the hair on the back of her neck. It was followed by another, then another, until the entire forest rang with a sound of wolves in distress. Lucas was moving before the echoes faded, his face grim as he headed for the door. "Something's wrong." Aria followed him downstairs and out onto the front porch, where pack members were already gathering, their expressions tense and worried. In the distance, she could see lights moving through the forest, flashlights or torches, too many to count. "What is it?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "Trouble," Zoe said, appearing beside them with a rifle slung over her shoulder. "Big trouble. We've got at least 50 wolves moving toward us from the north, all of them armed and looking for blood." "Davidson's supporters?"
Lucas asked.
"Some of them, maybe. But there are others, wolves I don't recognize, mercenaries by the smell of them." Zoe's expression was grim. "Someone's called in reinforcements, and they're not here to negotiate." The mate bond flared with Lucas's barely controlled rage, and Aria felt an answering surge of protective fury. These wolves were threatening her pack, she realized with surprise. When had she started thinking of Crescent Ridge as home? "How long do we have?" Lucas was already shifting into alpha mode, his entire demeanor changing as he prepared to defend his territory. 20 minutes, maybe less. Zoe checked her weapon with practiced efficiency. "They're not trying to hide their approach." "Because they don't need to," Aria said, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. "This isn't a stealth operation. It's a siege." Lucas turned to her, his pale eyes blazing. "Then we'd better be ready for war." But even as the pack mobilized around them, even as weapons were distributed and defensive positions established, Aria couldn't shake the feeling that this was exactly what their enemies had been waiting for. An excuse to attack Crescent Ridge directly, to eliminate both her and Lucas in one devastating strike. The real question was, would their hastily formed bond be strong enough to survive what was coming? Or would this be the night that everything fell apart? Chapter 8. The pack house transformed into a fortress in minutes. Aria watched in fascination and growing dread as Lucas's wolves moved with military precision, boarding up windows, establishing firing positions, and coordinating defensive strategies with the kind of efficiency that spoke of long practice. This wasn't the first time Crescent Ridge had been under siege. "Aria, I need you in the safe room," Lucas said, appearing at her elbow with a Kevlar vest and a grim expression.
"Now."
"Like hell." She pushed the vest back at him, her wolf bristling at the suggestion. "I'm not hiding while you fight for your life. This isn't a discussion." "You're right, it's not." She met his pale eyes squarely, letting him see the steel in her own. "These wolves are here because of me, Lucas. Because someone wants me dead badly enough to start a war over it. I'm not cowering in some underground bunker while people die protecting me. You're not trained for this kind of combat. I've been running from bounty hunters for 3 years. I think I know how to handle myself in a fight." She gestured to where Zoe was distributing ammunition to pack members who looked barely old enough to drive, let alone carry assault rifles. "Besides, you need every fighter you can get." Lucas looked like he wanted to argue further, but a sharp whistle from the perimeter cut him off. Tommy, one of the younger pack members, came jogging up the front steps with his face flushed from running. "They're in position, Alpha," he reported breathlessly. 53 hostiles, armed with military-grade weapons and what looks like supernatural restraining gear. "They've got us completely surrounded." "Any familiar faces?" "Some of Davidson's old supporters, but most of them are mercenaries. Human mercenaries, from the scent." Tommy's expression darkened. Someone paid serious money for this operation. Aria felt ice slide down her spine. Human mercenaries were bad news. They had no pack loyalty, no supernatural honor codes to restrain them. They'd kill anyone who got between them and their payday, including innocent pack members whose only crime was offering her sanctuary. "What do they want?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "You," Lucas said flatly. Dead or alive, though I suspect they'd prefer dead at this point. A voice boomed across the courtyard, amplified by what sounded like a military-grade bullhorn. Lucas Steele, we know you're harboring the fugitive Aria Blackwood. Send her out, and the rest of your pack lives. Counteroffer, Lucas called back, his alpha authority carrying easily across the distance. Get off my territory in the next 60 seconds, or I'll paint the forest with your blood. Harsh laughter echoed from the tree line. You're outnumbered 3-1, Steele. Your pack's brave, but they're not immortal. Neither are you. But even as Lucas projected confidence, Aria could smell his worry, sharp and bitter beneath the controlled alpha facade. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and fighting an enemy that had no qualms about killing innocent wolves to reach their target. There has to be another way, she said quietly. There is. Lucas turned to her, his expression deadly serious. You could accept my claim.
Formally.
In front of witnesses. Aria stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. What would that accomplish? It would make you a full member of this pack, under my protection as both alpha and mate. Anyone who wants to hurt you would have to go through the entire Crescent Ridge bloodline to do it. His pale eyes blazed with fierce determination. And I guarantee you, these mercenaries weren't paid enough to take on those odds. The offer hung between them like a lifeline, beautiful and terrifying in its implications. Accepting his claim wouldn't just be a political maneuver, it would be a complete surrender to the mate bond, an admission that she trusted him with her heart, her future, her very soul. But before she could answer, the night exploded into chaos. Gunfire erupted from 3 sides at once, muzzle flashes lighting up the forest like deadly fireworks. Bullets shattered windows and chewed through the pack house's wooden walls, sending splinters flying in every direction. Aria threw herself flat as a sniper's round whistled past her ear, embedding itself in the doorframe with a vicious crack. Taking fire from the north ridge, someone shouted from inside the house. South perimeter's compromised, came another voice. They're moving in fast. Lucas was already in motion, shifting into the deadly predator she glimpsed during the bounty hunter attack. His partially transformed state was a thing of nightmares, 7 feet of muscle and claws and barely contained fury, moving with inhuman speed and grace. Zoe, take the west side, he roared, his voice carrying easily over the din of battle. Marcus, get the non-combatants to the basement. Tommy, Sarah, with me. But even as his pack moved to obey, Aria could see they were being overwhelmed. The mercenaries had night vision, superior firepower, and the advantage of numbers. Crescent Ridge's wolves were brave and skilled, but they were fighting a losing battle. And it was all her fault. The thought hit her like a physical blow, driving her to her knees behind the dubious shelter of an overturned table. These people, Lucas's people, her people now, were going to die because she'd been too afraid to accept what fate had offered her. Too afraid to trust in the mate bond that had been pulling at her since the moment she'd laid eyes on Lucas in that moonlit forest. Enough, she whispered, the word torn from somewhere deep inside her chest. Then, louder, with all the authority she could muster. Enough. The word rang out with supernatural power, cutting through the gunfire and battle cries like a blade through silk. For a moment, even the mercenaries seemed to pause, surprised by the sudden command in her voice. Aria stood slowly, her hands raised in a gesture of surrender, and walked toward the front door. Aria, no! Lucas roared, but she was already stepping out onto the porch, making herself a perfect target for every sniper in the forest. I'm Aria Blackwood, she called out, her voice carrying clearly through the sudden quiet. I'm the one you want. Let's end this. Don't be an idiot, the voice from the forest called back. You think we're going to trust the word of a wanted killer? Then come and take me. She spread her arms wide, offering herself as bait. But you'll have to do it face to face like wolves, instead of hiding in the trees like cowards. The challenge hit its mark. She could hear angry mutters from the mercenaries, the kind of wounded pride that made professional killers do stupid things. But she could also hear something else, the distinctive sound of boots on forest floor, moving fast and hard in her direction. They were taking the bait. Behind her, she heard Lucas curse with colorful creativity, but she also heard something else, the subtle sounds of his pack repositioning, taking advantage of the mercenaries' tactical mistake. The first attacker broke through the tree line at a dead run, rifle raised and finger on the trigger. He was built like a linebacker, all muscle and bad intentions, with the kind of cold eyes that said he'd killed before and enjoyed it. Aria waited until he was 20 feet away, then shifted. The transformation hit her like lightning, bones elongating and reshaping, muscles expanding, senses sharpening to supernatural clarity. In less than 3 seconds, Aria Blackwood the woman was gone, replaced by a sleek black wolf with amber eyes and a mouthful of razor-sharp teeth. The mercenary's finger tightened on the trigger, but wolves were faster than human reflexes could track. She hit him at full speed, her 120 pounds of lupin fury bowling him over before he could fire. They went down in a tangle of snarling wolf and screaming human, her teeth finding his throat with predatory precision. Behind her, the forest exploded back into chaos as the mercenaries realized they'd been outmaneuvered. But now Lucas's wolves were ready for them, and the battle turned into something altogether more vicious. Aria dispatched her opponent and immediately shifted back to human form, snatching up his rifle and diving for cover as more attackers poured out of the tree line. The weapon felt foreign in her hands. She'd always preferred to fight in wolf form, but adrenaline and desperation made her a quick learner. Nice work. Zoe appeared beside her, blood streaking her face and her eyes blazing with battle fury. But we've got bigger problems. They've got some kind of supernatural restraining device. Looks like a net launcher. Like what they used on Lucas?
Worse.
This one's designed to incapacitate entire packs. Zoe's expression was grim. If they get it operational, we're all dead. Aria's blood ran cold. Where is it? North Ridge, about 200 yards. But it's heavily defended, and I can get there. The certainty in her own voice surprised her. I know those woods better than anyone. I've been hiding in them for 3 years. Aria. It's the only way. She checked the rifle's ammunition, her hands moving with newfound confidence. Besides, they want me alive, remember? They won't risk killing their prize. Zoe stared at her for a long moment, then nodded grimly.
Go.
I'll cover you. Aria took a deep breath, gathered her courage, and sprinted for the forest. The run to the North Ridge was a nightmare of ducking sniper fire and avoiding patrols, but her 3 years as a rogue had taught her things about moving unseen that no pack wolf could match. She flowed through the shadows like smoke, using every trick she'd learned to stay ahead of her pursuers. The restraining device turned out to be a massive contraption that looked like a cross between a rocket launcher and a spider web, all gleaming metal and silver-threaded netting, designed to incapacitate an entire pack in one devastating shot. And it was pointed directly at the pack house. 30 seconds to firing. One of the mercenaries called out. All units, prepare for target saturation. Aria didn't hesitate. She burst from the tree line at full speed, the stolen rifle blazing in her hands, laying down covering fire as she charged the weapon emplacement. Bullets whined past her head, but she kept running, kept firing, kept pushing forward through sheer force of will. She made it to within 10 feet of the device before a lucky shot took her down. The bullet caught her in the shoulder, spinning her around and sending her crashing to the forest floor with a cry of pain and fury. But even as blood poured from the wound, even as the mercenaries closed in for the kill, she managed to get her hands on the one thing that could end this nightmare. A single fragmentation grenade, liberated from a dead mercenary's belt. You want me? She snarled, pulling the pin with her teeth. Come and get me. The explosion lit up the forest like a second sun. Chapter 9. When Aria woke up, the first thing she noticed was that everything hurt. The second thing was that she was alive, which honestly came as something of a surprise given the last thing she remembered was pulling the pin on a fragmentation grenade at point-blank range. The third thing was that Lucas was holding her hand, and the mate bond was humming between them like a live wire. Don't ever do that again, he said without looking up from where he was studying their joined fingers. His voice was rough, like he'd been screaming, and she could smell the lingering traces of smoke and cordite in his hair. "Did it work?" she asked, her throat feeling like she'd been gargling gravel. "The mercenaries are dead or scattered. The restraining device is scrap metal, and you've been unconscious for 18 hours while Marcus dug bullet fragments out of your shoulder." Finally, he raised his head to meet her eyes, and what she saw there made her breath catch. "So yes, it worked. You saved my pack, Aria. You saved all of us." She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as pain lanced through her injured shoulder. "How many?" "3 wounded, none dead. Thanks to your little kamikaze run." His grip on her hand tightened. "Though I'm still trying to decide whether to kiss you or strangle you for scaring me like that." "I vote for kissing," she said, then felt heat flood her cheeks at the admission. Lucas's smile was soft and devastating. "I was hoping you'd say that." He leaned down slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, but she didn't want to. After 3 years of running, 3 years of being afraid to trust anyone or anything, she was tired of fighting the pull she felt toward this man. When his lips touched hers, the mate bond exploded between them like fireworks. It started gentle, a soft brush of mouth against mouth, warm and sweet and achingly tender. But the supernatural connection that bound them together had other ideas. Within seconds, the kiss deepened, became hungry and desperate, and filled with 3 years of suppressed longing. Aria gasped against his mouth, and Lucas took advantage, his tongue sliding between her lips to taste and claim and possess. She could feel his emotions through the bond, relief that she was alive, fury at the danger she'd put herself in, and underneath it all, a love so fierce and protective it took her breath away. "Lucas," she whispered against his lips, his name both prayer and surrender. "I know," he murmured, trailing kisses along her jaw and down the column of her throat. "I feel it too. The bond, the need, the absolute certainty that you belong to me and I belong to you." His words should have triggered all her carefully constructed defenses against dominant alphas and possessive declarations. Instead, they sent liquid heat pooling low in her belly, her wolf purring with satisfaction at finally being claimed by her mate.
Aria.
He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes, his pale gaze blazing with intensity. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Okay," she breathed, though part of her was terrified of what he might want to know. "Do you accept my claim? Not because you're grateful, not because you think you owe me something, but because you want this. Want us." His thumb brushed across her lower lip, and she had to bite back a moan at the simple contact. "Because once you accept, once we complete the mate bond, there's no going back. You'll be mine and I'll be yours for the rest of our lives." The words hung between them like a bridge, and Aria realized this was it. The moment she'd been running from for 3 years. The moment when she had to choose between the safety of solitude and the terrifying possibility of trusting someone else with her heart. Looking into Lucas's eyes, seeing the love and hope and desperate vulnerability he was trying so hard to hide, she realized the choice had been made the moment she'd stepped out onto that porch and offered herself as bait to protect his pack. Her pack. Her mate. Her home. "I accept," she whispered, the words feeling like stepping off a cliff and learning to fly at the same time. "I accept your claim, Lucas Steele. I want this. I want us." The smile that spread across his face was bright enough to power the entire pack house. "Thank Christ," he breathed, then claimed her mouth again in a kiss that was all heat and possession and barely controlled hunger. This time there was nothing gentle about it. This time, the mate bond sang between them with the force of a hurricane, demanding completion, demanding the physical claiming that would bind them together forever. "Wait," Aria gasped, pushing weakly at his chest as rational thought tried to reassert itself. "I'm injured," Marcus said. "Marcus said you'd be fine in a day or 2, Lucas corrected, his lips finding that sensitive spot where her neck met her shoulder. "And the claiming will actually help you heal faster." "How do you know that?" "Because I've spent the last 18 hours researching every aspect of mate bond completion while you were unconscious." He pulled back to meet her eyes, his expression serious despite the desire burning in his gaze. I wanted to be absolutely certain I knew what I was asking of you. The admission sent warmth flooding through her chest. Even now, even when she'd already accepted his claim, he was still thinking of her well-being first. Still making sure she had all the information she needed to make an informed choice. And, she asked softly, and the claiming is intense, but it's not dangerous. There will be a physical marking. He gestured to the spot where her neck met her shoulder. That will heal within hours. The emotional and spiritual connection will be permanent and unbreakable. And afterward. His voice dropped to a husky whisper. Afterward, you'll be able to feel everything I feel. Know that I'm safe. Know that I'm thinking of you. Know that I love you more than my own life. Tears pricked at her eyes. Happy tears for once. I love you too, she whispered. I think I've loved you since the moment you tackled me down that ravine. Even when I was being an arrogant ass? Especially when you were being an arrogant ass. She reached up to cup his face, marveling at the way he leaned into her touch like a cat seeking affection. You were protecting me even then, weren't you? Even when I thought you hated me. I could never hate you, Aria. Even if I tried. He turned his head to press a kiss to her palm. You're my mate. My other half. The missing piece of my soul I didn't even know I was looking for. The romantic declaration should have been cheesy. Instead, it was perfect, honest and raw and absolutely devastating in its sincerity. Show me, she whispered, letting all her walls finally crumble. Complete the bond, Lucas. Make me yours. What happened next was beyond anything she could have imagined. Lucas's eyes flared with silver fire, and she felt the exact moment his careful control finally snapped. His mouth crashed down on hers with desperate hunger, while his hands mapped every inch of her body with reverent desperation. The claiming itself was a symphony of sensation, the sharp, sweet pain as his canines pierced the tender skin of her throat, the flood of his emotions pouring through the newly completed bond, the overwhelming sense of rightness as their souls finally, truly connected. And then, as the mark healed and the bond settled into place, came the most incredible sensation of all, the absolute certainty that she was home. Not in a place, but in a person. In the arms of the man who would love and protect and cherish her for the rest of their lives. Mine, Lucas whispered against her throat, his voice rough with emotion and satisfaction. Yours, she agreed, running her fingers through his hair as the last of her fears finally melted away. Always yours. But even as they held each other in the aftermath of their claiming, even as the mate bond sang between them with perfect harmony, Aria couldn't quite shake the feeling that their troubles weren't over. Because somewhere out there, the person who'd hired those mercenaries was still free. Still dangerous. Still willing to kill innocent wolves to get what they wanted. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. Chapter 10. 3 days after the claiming, Aria was finally beginning to understand why wolves went slightly insane during their first week as mated pairs. The bond was intoxicating, a constant stream of Lucas's emotions and sensations that left her feeling drunk on connection. She could feel his presence even when he was on the other side of the pack house, could sense his moods as clearly as her own. It was wonderful. It was overwhelming. And it was making it very difficult to concentrate on the stack of evidence Marcus had spread across the dining room table. Focus, lovebirds, Zoe said dryly, though her smile took the sting out of the words. We need to figure out who is really behind that mercenary attack before they try again. Right. Aria dragged her attention away from the way Lucas's shirt stretched across his shoulders as he leaned over the documents. What do we have? More than we expected, Marcus replied, his expression grim. The mercenaries' communications equipment survived the explosion. We've been tracking their financial records, and what we found is disturbing. He pushed a tablet across the table, and Aria felt the blood drain from her face as she read the screen. Bank transfers totaling nearly $2 million, all traced back to a shell company that was itself funded by an account registered to someone she'd hoped never to see again. Alpha Victoria Blackthorn, she whispered, the name tasting like poison on her tongue. You know her? Lucas asked, though the mate bond was already carrying his suspicions.
She's my aunt.
My father's sister. Aria's hands were shaking as she set down the tablet. She was supposed to take over the pack when he died, but the council chose his beta instead. She didn't take it well. Define didn't take it well, Zoe said, her voice deceptively casual. She challenged the new Alpha to single combat.
Lost.
Got exiled for trying to murder him in his sleep when she couldn't accept the defeat. Aria ran her hands through her hair, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. But that was over 5 years ago. Why would she be coming after me now? Because, Marcus said quietly, according to pack genealogy records, you're the last legitimate heir to your father's bloodline. If something were to happen to you, and if Victoria could somehow prove she was wrongfully exiled, she'd have a claim to the territory, Lucas finished, his voice deadly calm. A very profitable territory, from what I understand. Aria felt sick. She's been using me. All this time, she's been using me as a pawn in some twisted game to reclaim what she thinks is hers. It's worse than that, Marcus continued, pulling up another document. We found evidence that she was the one who hired the mercenaries who planted the evidence against you 3 years ago. She wanted you exiled, not executed. She needed you alive but discredited. Why? Because as long as you were a wanted fugitive, you couldn't make any legal claims to your father's territory. But you were still alive, still a potential threat to anyone else who might try to seize power. Lucas's jaw was clenched so tightly she could hear his teeth grinding. She's been playing a long game, Aria, keeping you on the run while she built up resources and alliances. Then why try to kill me now? The question came out as barely more than a whisper. Because you found a mate, Zoe said bluntly. A powerful mate with his own territory and political connections. Suddenly, you're not just a discredited rogue. You're the Luna of the Crescent Ridge pack, with all the legal protections that entails. The pieces were falling into place now, creating a picture so horrifying Aria could barely process it. She killed Marcus Davidson and framed me to get me out of the way. Then she spent 3 years building up her power base, planning to eliminate me once she was strong enough to seize my father's territory. But our mating bond changed the equation, Lucas added grimly. Now she has to eliminate both of us, along with anyone who might support our claim. Which means this pack is in danger because of me. The guilt hit her like a physical blow. Everyone here is at risk, because I brought my family's problems to your door. Our door, Lucas corrected firmly, moving to stand behind her chair and placing his hands on her shoulders. The contact sent soothing warmth through the mate bond. This is your home now, Aria. Your pack. And we protect our own. Besides, Zoe added with a wicked grin, it's been way too quiet around here lately. I was starting to get bored. Despite everything, Aria found herself smiling. You have a very twisted definition of entertainment. Occupational hazard of being raised by wolves. Zoe's expression turned serious. The question is, what do we do about Victoria? She's got resources, connections, and a serious grudge. She's not going to stop coming after you. Then we don't wait for her to come to us, Lucas said, his alpha authority making everyone in the room sit up straighter. We go to her. Aria twisted in her chair to stare at him. Are you insane? Victoria's been planning this for years. She's got mercenaries, political allies, probably an entire army at her disposal. She's also got one major weakness, Lucas replied, his smile sharp enough to cut glass. She underestimated you. She thinks you're still the scared little girl who ran away 3 years ago. She has no idea what you've become. And what have I become? The Luna of the most powerful pack in the Northern Territories. A wolf who single-handedly took out a squad of military contractors. A woman who survived 3 years on her own and came out stronger. His hands tightened on her shoulders, and she felt his fierce pride through the bond. She's going to regret ever tangling with you. The confidence in his voice was intoxicating, but Aria couldn't quite shake her fear. Victoria's dangerous, Lucas. She's smart, ruthless, and completely without conscience. I've seen what she's capable of. Then tell us, Marcus said gently. Help us understand what we're up against. Aria took a deep breath, steeling herself for the memories she'd spent years trying to forget. Victoria was always my father's favorite. Brilliant, ambitious, absolutely devoted to the pack's interests. But she was also obsessed with power, with control. When she didn't get chosen as his successor, she completely snapped. How so? She started with psychological warfare. Anonymous letters threatening phone calls, accidents that weren't really accidents. When that didn't work, she moved on to more direct methods. Aria's voice grew quiet. She tried to poison the new Alpha's mate. When that failed, she went after their children. The silence that followed was heavy with horrified understanding. Jesus, Zoe breathed. She tried to murder children? A 5-year-old girl and her baby brother. Aria's hands were shaking again. That's when the pack finally had enough. They voted unanimously to exile her, but not before she swore she'd return and reclaim what was rightfully hers. And now she's trying to do exactly that, Lucas said grimly. Using you as the key to legitimize her claim. So, what's the plan? Marcus asked. We end this, Lucas replied simply. Tonight. Aria's blood turned to ice. Tonight? Victoria's expecting us to wait, to let her dictate the terms of engagement. Instead, we're going to hit her before she's ready. Lucas was already moving toward the weapons cabinet, his alpha efficiency kicking into high gear. Marcus, I need you to coordinate with the other territorial alphas. Make sure they know what's happening and that they stay out of our way. What about the pack?
Zoe asked.
Minimum force, maximum stealth. You, me, Aria, and maybe 6 others. We go in quiet, take out Victoria and her key lieutenants, and leave the rest of her people with a choice: surrender or face the consequences. And if it goes wrong? Aria asked, though she could already feel through the bond that Lucas had no intention of letting it go wrong. Then we adapt and overcome. He turned to meet her eyes, his expression soft despite the steel in his voice. But it won't go wrong, Aria. I won't let anything happen to you. It's not me I'm worried about. She stood up, moving to the window that overlooked the pack grounds where young wolves were playing in the afternoon sunlight. These people trusted me with their safety. If my family problems get them killed. They won't. Lucas appeared behind her, his arms sliding around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. I promise you, Aria, we're going to end this threat, and we're all going to come home safe. She wanted to believe him. The mate bond made it almost impossible not to believe him. But she'd learned the hard way that life didn't always cooperate with promises and good intentions. Where's she? She asked finally. About 200 miles north, in what used to be her father's territory. She's taken over the old pack house and turned it into a fortress. Marcus consulted his notes. Intel suggests she's got maybe 30 wolves under her command, plus an unknown number of human contractors. 30 wolves and who knows how many mercenaries, versus 7 of us. Aria shook her head. Those aren't good odds, Lucas. They would be if we were planning a frontal assault. His smile was predatory. Good thing that's not what we're doing. Then what are we doing? We're going hunting, he said simply. And Victoria Blackthorn is about to learn why you don't threaten the Luna of the Crescent Ridge pack. Chapter 11. The old Blackwood territory looked like something out of a nightmare. What had once been a thriving pack community was now a militarized compound, complete with razor wire, guard towers, and enough firepower to level a small city. Victoria had turned Aria's childhood home into a fortress designed for one purpose: war. Christ, Zoe whispered from their position in the tree line. She's really gone all out, hasn't she? Victoria never did anything halfway, Aria replied quietly, studying the compound through high-powered binoculars. The sight of her father's pack house, now bristling with weapons and crawling with mercenaries, made her chest tight with a grief she'd thought she'd processed years ago. This had been home once. These walls had sheltered her as a child, protected her from nightmares and scraped knees and all the small terrors of growing up. Now they housed the woman who wanted her dead. Guard rotation every 20 minutes, Marcus reported, his voice barely audible through their earpieces. Sniper posts on the north and south towers, patrol teams covering the perimeter. Professional setup. Too professional, Lucas murmured from beside her. Victoria's military contractors are good. Very good. Should we abort? Sarah, one of the younger pack members, asked nervously.
No.
Aria lowered the binoculars, her expression grim but determined. This ends tonight, one way or another. What's the play?
Zoe asked.
Lucas consulted his watch. In 15 minutes, there's going to be a shift change. Sarah and Mike will create a distraction on the eastern perimeter, nothing too obvious, just enough to draw some attention. While they're occupied, the rest of us go in through the old service tunnels. Service tunnels? Marcus looked confused. My father was paranoid about siege situations, Aria explained. He had a network of underground tunnels built connecting the pack house to various exit points in the forest. Most people don't know about them. Will they still be operational after all these years? Only one way to find out. She slung her rifle across her back and started moving toward a cluster of boulders about 50 yards to their left. The entrance is this way. The tunnel mouth was exactly where she remembered it, hidden behind a carefully camouflaged door that looked like nothing more than a natural depression in the rock face. But when Lucas tried the handle, it didn't budge. Locked, he reported grimly. Let me. Aria pushed past him, running her fingers along the edges of the door until she found what she was looking for, a small, hidden keypad disguised as a patch of lichen. My father was old-fashioned about some things, but he loved his technology. She input a 12-digit code, holding her breath as the mechanism processed the command. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft click, the lock disengaged. How did you remember the code after all these years? Tommy asked in amazement. It's my birthday, Aria said quietly. He used my birthday for everything. The tunnel was dark and musty, obviously unused for years, but structurally sound. They made their way through the winding passage in single file, their footsteps muffled by decades of accumulated dust and debris. Movement topside, Sarah's voice crackled through their earpieces. Looks like we've got their attention. Roger that, Lucas replied. Keep them busy for another 5 minutes. The tunnel ended at another concealed door, this one opening into what Aria remembered as her father's private study. She pressed her ear to the metal, listening for any sounds of occupation, then carefully turned the handle. The study was empty, but it had been transformed beyond recognition. Gone were the comfortable leather chairs and warm wooden bookshelves she remembered from her childhood. In their place was a high-tech command center, complete with multiple monitors showing security feeds from around the compound. Well, Zoe whispered, staring at the banks of surveillance equipment, that's not ominous at all. She's been watching everything, Marcus observed grimly. Every approach, every weak point, every... He was cut off by the sound of slow applause from the doorway. Very impressive, Victoria Blackthorne said, stepping into the study with a predator's smile. Though I have to admit, I'm disappointed. I was hoping my dear niece would provide more of a challenge. Aria's blood turned to ice. Victoria looked exactly the same as she had 5 years ago, tall and elegant and beautiful in the way that poisonous flowers were beautiful. Her silver hair was pulled back in a perfect chignon, and she wore a business suit that probably cost more than most wolves made in a year. But it was her eyes that made Aria's wolf whimper with instinctive fear. Cold, calculating, and absolutely without mercy. Hello, Aunt Victoria, Aria managed, proud of how steady her voice sounded. Hello, dear. You look well. Exile seems to have agreed with you. Victoria's gaze shifted to Lucas, and her smile turned predatory. And you must be the Alpha who's been causing me so much trouble. Lucas Steele, isn't it? Victoria Blackthorne, Lucas replied calmly, though Aria could feel his tension through the mate bond. I've heard so much about you. I'm sure you have, though I doubt my reputation does justice to the reality. She gestured, and armed figures stepped out of the shadows, at least a dozen mercenaries, all with weapons trained on the small group. You walked right into my trap, you know. I've been monitoring those tunnels for months. Aria felt her heart sink. They'd been so careful, so clever, and it had all been for nothing. The distraction was a nice touch, Victoria continued conversationally. But I'm afraid your friends won't be joining us. My people have already taken them into custody. Sarah? Mike. Lucas spoke into his earpiece, but there was no response except static. They're alive, Victoria assured him.
For now.
Whether they stay that way depends entirely on how cooperative you're willing to be. What do you want? Aria asked, though she already knew the answer. What I've always wanted, dear. What's rightfully mine? Victoria moved to the window, gazing out at the compound she'd built on the bones of Aria's childhood home. This territory, this pack, this legacy that should have been mine from the beginning. It was never yours, Aria said quietly. Father chose someone else. The pack chose someone else. Your father chose a weak-minded fool who ran the territory into the ground within 2 years. The pack chose cowardice over strength. Victoria's voice hardened with old bitterness. But that's all going to change now.
How?
Lucas asked. Simple. Victoria turned back to them, her smile sharp as a blade. You're going to help me eliminate the current pack leadership. Then, as the last surviving member of the Blackwood bloodline, I'll assume control of the territory. I'm the last surviving member of the Bloodwood bloodline, Aria pointed out. Not for long. Victoria's laugh was like breaking glass. You're going to have a tragic accident, dear. Something involving silver bullets and a very public execution for the murder of Marcus Davidson. The pack will be so shocked by your villainy that they'll welcome new leadership with open arms. And if we refuse? Then your mate dies slowly and painfully while you watch. Then your friends. Then every member of the Crescent Ridge pack, one by one, until you agree to cooperate. Victoria's expression didn't change, but her scent turned cold as winter. I have all the time in the world, Aria. The question is, how many people are you willing to let die for your pride? The words hit Aria like physical blows. Through the mate bond, she could feel Lucas's rage, his desperate need to protect her and the pack members who'd trusted them with their lives. But she could also feel his helplessness, his recognition that they were outnumbered and outgunned. There's a third option, she said quietly. Victoria raised an eyebrow. Oh, trial by combat. You and me one-on-one. Winner takes all. The silence that followed was so complete Aria could hear her own heartbeat. Victoria stared at her for a long moment, then began to laugh. You want to challenge me to single combat? My dear child, you're barely trained. I've been fighting wars since before you were born. Then it should be an easy victory for you. Aria stepped forward, letting her wolf energy rise to the surface. Unless you're afraid? Victoria's laughter died instantly. I'm not afraid of a pampered pack princess who's spent the last 3 years running from her own shadow. Then prove it. Aria's voice carried the authority she was only now learning to wield. Face me in the old way. Let the pack see which of us is truly worthy to lead. Victoria studied her for a long moment, calculation flickering behind her cold eyes. Finally, she nodded. Very well. Trial by combat it is. Her smile was razor-sharp. But when I kill you, dear niece, I'm going to make sure your mate watches every second of it. As they prepared for the fight that would determine not just their fates, but the future of 2 entire packs, Aria felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. Win or lose, this nightmare would finally be over. But as she shifted into her wolf form and faced the predator who'd haunted her dreams for 5 years, she couldn't help but wonder, had she just saved her pack, or doomed them all? Chapter 12. The courtyard of the old Blackwood pack house had been transformed into a makeshift arena, with mercenaries and Victoria's wolves forming a loose circle around the combat space. Floodlights cast harsh shadows across the ground, turning the familiar landscape of Aria's childhood into something alien and threatening. But it was the scent that hit her hardest, pack fear, blood, and underneath it all, the metallic tang of silver weapons. Victoria had come prepared for every contingency, except the one standing before her now. Aria stretched her lupin muscles, feeling the familiar power of her wolf form flowing through her bones. 3 years of survival as a rogue had honed her body into a weapon, every movement economical and deadly. Across the circle, Victoria's massive silver wolf paced with predatory grace, easily 50 pounds heavier and radiating the confidence of a killer who'd never lost a fight. Last chance to surrender, little niece. Victoria's mental voice echoed through the pack bond, cold as winter wind. I might even make your death quick. The only one dying tonight is you, Aria replied, baring her fangs in a wolfish grin. Victoria's laughter was like broken glass. We'll see. The attack came without warning. Victoria launched herself across the circle with inhuman speed, her massive jaws aimed directly for Aria's throat. But Aria was no longer the frightened girl who'd fled this territory 3 years ago. She rolled sideways at the last second, Victoria's teeth snapping shut on empty air. The crowd roared its approval as both wolves circled each other, looking for an opening. Victoria was bigger, stronger, more experienced. But Aria was faster, and 3 years of running from bounty hunters had taught her things about survival that no formal training could match. She's playing with you. Lucas's voice came through their mate bond, tight with barely controlled fear. Victoria's testing your reflexes. Don't let her dictate the pace. He was right. Victoria was treating this like a game, confident in her eventual victory. Time to change the rules. Aria feinted left, then spun right, her claws raking across Victoria's flank in a move that would have disemboweled a lesser opponent. Victoria howled in pain and fury, silver blood spattering the dirt. First blood to the challenger, someone in the crowd shouted. But Victoria's retaliation was swift and brutal. She caught Aria in the shoulder with a vicious bite, her fangs sinking deep enough to scrape bone. Aria yelped, stumbling backward as pain lanced through her entire left side. Getting tired already? Victoria taunted, licking Aria's blood from her muzzle. I haven't even started yet. The wound was already healing, but slowly. Victoria's claws had been dipped in diluted silver, enough to cause serious damage without being immediately fatal. A cheater's trick, but an effective one. Two can play that game, Aria muttered, remembering the silver knife she'd secreted in her belt before the transformation. Shifting back to human form in the middle of combat was dangerous, but it was also unexpected. The change hit her like lightning, bones shrinking and reshaping, fur receding to reveal pale skin marked with rapidly healing claw marks. The crowd gasped as she completed the transition in seconds, the hidden blade appearing in her hand as if by magic. Victoria's wolf form froze in confusion. She'd been expecting a supernatural battle of fang and claw, not a weapons fight. That moment of hesitation was all Aria needed. She lunged forward, the silver blade aimed at Victoria's heart, but her aunt was too experienced to fall for such a direct attack. Victoria shifted back to human form with inhuman speed, catching Aria's wrist and twisting until she dropped the knife. Clever little bitch, Victoria snarled, her elegant facade finally cracking to reveal the monster beneath. But not clever enough. They went down in a tangle of limbs, fighting for control of the blade with desperate intensity. Victoria was stronger in human form, but Aria had desperation on her side, and the knowledge that everyone she loved would die if she failed. You killed Marcus Davidson, Aria gasped as they struggled. And let me take the blame. Marcus was a means to an end, Victoria replied, her grip on Aria's throat tightening. Just like you. You destroyed my life. My mother's life. Your mother was weak. Just like your father. Just like you. Victoria's smile was pure malice. The Blackwood bloodline ends with me. No, Aria said quietly, her fingers closing around something metallic hidden in the dirt. It begins with me. The hidden knife, a backup she'd planted during their earlier reconnaissance, slid between Victoria's ribs with surgical precision, finding the space between bone and organ that meant instant death for even a supernatural creature. Victoria's eyes widened in shock, her grip on Aria's throat loosening as silver poison flooded her system. Impossible, she whispered. You made one mistake, Aria said, pulling herself out from under her dying aunt's weight. You assumed I was still the scared little girl you remembered. But that girl died the night you framed me for murder. What came back was something much more dangerous. Victoria tried to speak, but blood was already foaming from her lips. Within seconds, she was still, her cold eyes finally empty of their calculating malice. The silence that followed was deafening. 50 armed mercenaries and wolves stared at the young woman who'd just killed the most feared predator in 3 territories with nothing but determination and a hidden blade. "Victoria Blackthorn is dead," Aria announced, her voice carrying easily across the courtyard. "By right of combat, by right of blood, and by right of justice for her crimes, I claim leadership of this territory." For a moment, nobody moved. Then, slowly, one of Victoria's wolves, a grizzled old fighter who looked like he'd been born in battle, stepped forward and dropped to one knee. "Alpha," he said simply. Others followed, both wolves and mercenaries recognizing the ancient law that governed such challenges. Within minutes, the entire compound had acknowledged her victory, her right to rule, her authority over Victoria's former domain. "My first act as Alpha," Aria continued, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system, "is to free all prisoners and offer clemency to any who served Victoria under duress. Those who served her willingly." She let the threat hang in the air. "You have until sunrise to leave this territory and never return." Most of the mercenaries were already packing their gear, clearly having no interest in testing the new Alpha's resolve. But the wolves, Victoria's former pack members, remained, watching her with expressions ranging from curiosity to hope. "What about us?" the old fighter asked. "This pack's been leaderless for 3 years, rudderless for longer than that. We need guidance, structure, purpose." Aria looked around at the faces surrounding her, wolves who'd been twisted by Victoria's ambitions but weren't inherently evil, just lost and looking for something to believe in. These had been her father's people once, before corruption and fear had driven them away from everything he'd built. "Then you'll have it," she said firmly. "But not from me. Not anymore." Confusion rippled through the crowd. "Alpha. This territory will be absorbed into Crescent Ridge Packlands, under the leadership of Alpha Lucas Steele." She gestured to where Lucas was approaching, having freed their captured pack members and secured the compound. "Any wolf who wishes to join us will be welcomed. Any who wish to seek other packs will be given safe passage and letters of recommendation." "And you?" the old fighter asked. Aria smiled, feeling the mate bond sing with Lucas's pride and love as he reached her side. "I'm going home." 6 months later, the Crescent Ridge pack house had never looked more beautiful. Strings of lights wound through the trees surrounding the property, and the scent of roasting meat and fresh bread filled the evening air. The entire pack had turned out for the celebration, along with representatives from a dozen other territories who'd come to witness what was already being called the wedding of the century. Aria stood at her bedroom window, watching the festivities below with a mixture of joy and disbelief. 6 months ago, she'd been a wanted fugitive with a price on her head. Now she was the Luna of one of the most powerful packs in North America, preparing to formalize the mate bond that had already transformed her life in ways she was still discovering. "Having second thoughts?" Zoe asked, appearing in the doorway with a champagne glass in each hand and a knowing smile on her face. "About the wedding? Never." Aria accepted the champagne gratefully. "About wearing this dress? Absolutely." The gown was a masterpiece of ivory silk and delicate lace, designed specifically for her by one of the pack's more artistically inclined members. It was beautiful, elegant, and absolutely nothing like anything she would have chosen for herself. "You look stunning," Zoe assured her. "Like a fairy tale princess. I feel like I'm playing dress-up in someone else's life." "You are, in a way." Zoe settled into the window seat beside her, her expression thoughtful. The old Aria, the scared girl who ran away 3 years ago, she never would have worn this dress, never would have stood up to Victoria, never would have believed she deserved happiness. And now you're the woman who saved 2 packs, killed the most dangerous predator in 3 territories, and managed to tame the most notoriously stubborn alpha in North America. Zoe's grin was wicked. "I'd say you've earned the right to wear whatever the hell you want." Before Aria could respond, a soft knock on the door interrupted them. Marcus poked his head in, looking handsome in his formal tuxedo. "Ladies, it's time." Lucas is pacing holes in the carpet downstairs, and I'm pretty sure he's going to spontaneously combust if he is to wait much longer. Aria took a deep breath, smoothing down the silk skirt with hands that were only slightly trembling. How do I look? Like the Luna of the most powerful pack in 3 states, Marcus said seriously. Like a woman who's fought for everything she has and isn't afraid to fight for more. Like someone worthy of my brother's devotion. The words sent warmth flooding through her chest. Over the past 6 months, Marcus had become more than just her mate's brother. He'd become family, the kind of unwavering support she'd never known she needed. "Thank you," she said softly. "Thank you," he replied, "for making him happy. For giving him something to fight for besides duty and obligation." The walk to the ceremonial circle seemed to take forever and no time at all. Aria was vaguely aware of the crowd standing as she passed, of the flash of cameras and the whispered comments about how beautiful she looked, how perfect the ceremony was, how romantic the whole story had become. But all of that faded into background noise the moment she saw Lucas waiting for her at the center of the circle. He looked magnificent in his formal attire. Black tuxedo that emphasized his broad shoulders and pale eyes, his dark hair slightly tousled by the evening breeze. But it was his expression that took her breath away. He was looking at her like she was the most precious thing in his world, like he couldn't quite believe she was real and walking toward him. The mate bond hummed between them, carrying his emotions as clearly as if he'd spoken them aloud. Love, pride, wonder, and underneath it all, the bone-deep satisfaction of a wolf who'd finally found his other half. "Dearly beloved," the officiant began, but Aria barely heard the traditional words. All her attention was focused on the man standing across from her, on the way his eyes never left her face, on the small smile that curved his lips as they exchanged vows that were really just formalities at this point. They'd already pledged themselves to each other in the oldest way possible. This ceremony was for the pack, for tradition, for the human side of their nature that craved ritual and celebration. "Do you, Lucas Steele, take Aria Blackwood to be your lawfully wedded wife, your mate, your Luna, in sickness and in health, in pack and in solitude, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Lucas said, his voice carrying clearly across the hushed crowd. "And longer, if fate allows it." "And do you, Aria Blackwood, take Lucas Steele to be your lawfully wedded husband, your mate, your Alpha, in sickness and in health, in pack and in solitude, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Forever and always." "Then by the power vested in me by the supernatural council and the ancient laws of our people, I now pronounce you husband and wife, Alpha and Luna, mates in the eyes of moon and pack." The officiant smiled. "You may kiss your bride." Lucas didn't need to be told twice. He stepped forward and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she didn't realize she'd been shedding. "I love you," he whispered, so quietly only she could hear. "I love you too," she whispered back. "Always." When his lips met hers, the mate bond exploded between them like fireworks, sending waves of pure joy cascading through both their systems. The crowd cheered, but Aria was lost in the sensation of being completely, perfectly connected to the man who'd fought for her, protected her, and loved her even when she'd been too afraid to love herself. They were still kissing when the first howl echoed across the celebration, a long, joyful note that was quickly taken up by every wolf present. Within seconds, the entire pack was howling their approval, their voices rising to the moon in a song as old as their species. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard and grinning like fools, Lucas leaned his forehead against hers. "So," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "any regrets?" Aria looked around at the pack celebrating around them. Their pack now, their family, their home. She thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment, all the pain and fear and loneliness that had led her to the forest clearing where she'd first met the man who had become her everything. "Just one," she said seriously. Lucas's expression flickered with concern. "What's that?" "I regret that it took me so long to realize what I had." She smiled, going up on her toes to kiss him again. But I'll never make that mistake again. Good, he said, sweeping her up in his arms as the crowd cheered again. Because you're stuck with me now, Luna. Forever and always. Forever and always, she agreed, laughing as he spun her around under the stars. And as the Crescent Ridge pack held their joy to the moon above, Aria Blackwood Steele finally understood what home really meant. It wasn't a place or a territory or even a pack house filled with the people she loved. Home was wherever Lucas was. Home was the sound of his heartbeat under her ear, the warmth of his arms around her, the absolute certainty that no matter what challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together. Home was love, fierce and true and strong enough to overcome any obstacle. Home was forever.
The end.